Coming up on Arirang News, the total number of coronavirus cases worldwide surpasses 10 million, with more than 500,000 deaths. South Korea reports another 42 cases. South Korea's economy is expected to contract in the second quarter by 1.8%, but that's far better than other developed countries, which are going to see growth of minus 10%, 18% or more. And President JaeIn calls for a national effort to make South Korea a global power in making parts and materials. He tells officials to prepare a strategy to make the country the world's factory for the most cutting-edge industries. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The total number of cases of COVID-19 worldwide is now surpassed 10 million, and the total number of deaths more than 500,000. Hardest hit is still the United States, with total diagnosed cases surpassing 2.5 million and deaths now more than 125,000. Brazil is also seeing a surge, with the number of daily confirmed cases topping 30,000. South Korea, meanwhile, reported 42 new cases of COVID-19 on Monday. Of them, 30 were local transmissions. 12 were imported, of which 5 were detected at quarantine checkpoints. 7 were reported in Seoul and 16 in Gyeonggi-do province. Total cases now stand at 12,757. There were no additional deaths, meaning the death toll remains at 282. More than 18,000 people are currently being tested. Sports fans in South Korea will be allowed to attend games and matches in person as soon as this week. That's under new social distancing guidelines, though attendance will be kept significantly under each venue's capacity. Kim Hyo-sun has the details.
Professional sports leagues in South Korea will reopen to fans, but on a limited basis. This comes as quarantine authorities says Sunday that spectators will be able to attend sports events under the condition that strict infection prevention and control measures are adhered to.
In accordance to Level 1 distancing in daily life, public facilities and sports stadiums with lower infection risk will reopen in phases.
The country's baseball league, which has been underway since May with no spectators, welcomed the move. The Korea Baseball Association says all 10 teams have each prepared detailed quarantine protocols, vowing to strictly abide by them, including a mandatory healthy distance to be kept between fans. It explains all tickets will be sold online, so contact tracing will be easy, while all fans will be reminded to wear face masks and stay home if they do not feel well. Under the government's plan, the KBO expects to reopen stadiums to fans as early as this weekend, while limiting the number of spectators for each game.
The KBO and all 10 teams have been preparing quarantine measures to welcome baseball fans. We'll gradually open with 30% capacity.
The Korea Professional Football League says it will gradually increase the number of spectators, beginning from 30 to 40% of the usual. The Korea Ladies Professional Golf Association is also preparing to welcome back fans. Given the steady rise in the number of new confirmed cases in South Korea, however, it's left to be seen how the move could be expanded going forward. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
In other news, the South Korean government held a hearing today for 2 groups of North Korean defectors that have been sending propaganda leaflets into the north to give them a final chance to explain themselves before revoking their operation permits. The Unification Ministry claims these 2 groups have risked the safety and lives of South Koreans living near their border by sending those leaflets over the DMZ and floating plastic bottles containing rice and Bibles to the north by sea. The 2 groups are called Kunsem and Fighters for a Free North Korea, but the latter did not attend today's hearing. If their permits are revoked, then it'll be hard to get donations because they won't be tax deductible. The latest data from the OECD suggests the South Korean economy is further along the track to recovery than other developed countries. And other data show South Korea's economic contraction in the second quarter of this year won't be anywhere near as bad as most of the world's other major economies. Our Kim Jae-hee has this report.
Despite the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, South Korea is seeing a relatively positive economic forecast. The OECD's composite leading indicator for the South Korean economy in May was higher than any other OECD member. The leading economic index for South Korea hit 100 in May, up 0.2 points on month, and has been rising since September last year. A reading above 100 means the economy is likely to expand over the next 6 to 9 months. Although many of the OECD member states saw an on-month rise in May, South Korea was the only country that reached 100. The last time South Korea's composite leading indicator reached 100 was in July 2018. Data from Bloomberg also shows South Korea's economic contraction in the second quarter of this year won't be as bad as most of the world's other major economies. Bloomberg's analysis of estimates by 24 banks and research institutes found South Korea's real GDP will likely shrink by 1.8% from a year earlier. By contrast, the average growth forecast for the G20 is minus 18.1%. China is the only major economy expected to grow in the second quarter, with 2% growth predicted. The World Bank also said South Korea successfully responded to the pandemic at an early stage, which can be a lesson for every other country. South Korea's strong response has lessened the economic damage from COVID-19, but some experts say it's a bit early to be too optimistic due to the uncertainty of the pandemic's impact on the global economy. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in says that South Korea is on its way to becoming a strong, unshakable economy, despite the export restrictions by Japan in place for a year now. In a meeting with his top aides on Monday, Moon said that contrary to concerns that this would deal a direct blow to the economy, the restrictions have rather sped up the localization of production and diversified Korea's suppliers. He noted the growing protectionism and inward focus of countries amid the pandemic and called for an active response.
소재 부품 강국과 첨단 산업 세계 공장이 되겠다는 담대한 목표를 분명히 하고 민관이 다시 한번 혼혈체가 되어 범국가적 역량을 총동원해야 하겠습니다. 이에 대한 정부의 전략과 계획을 국민들께 보고할 수 있도록 준비해 주기 바랍니다.
The president also said that support from the National Assembly is crucial, calling for the swift passage of the government's $29 billion extra budget bill. He said he believes Parliament won't turn a blind eye to those who are suffering. Moon also expressed hope for increased consumption through a large retail campaign dubbed the Korea Dongheng Sale, which runs until July 12th. And noting that COVID-19 is under control in the country, he also said he hopes people will travel more domestically during their summer vacations. Time now for an in-depth look at the market action on this Monday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, thank you for coming on today.
Happy to be here.
Well, U.S. stocks closed quite a bit lower on Friday after the Fed's stress test for banks and new rules on bank dividends. Korean stocks today quite a bit lower as well. What's the story in the markets?
Okay, well, the United States, the Fed carried out a periodic stress test that they do, and the regular version of the test, apparently most large banks and institutions did do well. But then because of the COVID virus, they carried out some extra testing, assuming very slow U-shaped recovery or W-shaped recovery. And in those cases, some institutions reached minimum capital levels. So the Fed limited dividends and forbid stock buybacks by these institutions, and that seemed to have started a bit of a nervousness on the U.S. stock market. Now, there's other reasons for the United States to be nervous as well. The COVID virus seems to be increasing in the United States. The Florida and Texas states have reversed their openings, and only 2 states have falling number of infections. In fact, the United States is experiencing highest number of infections, more than 40,000 per day. Death rates are not that bad, but usually death rates lag behind infection rates. So there are some concerns that the United States may go into a recession because the COVID virus is getting worse. And then the social unrest is continuing, and the unemployment measures, the aid to state measures, the aids to various companies that United States put in after the coronavirus. It's due to run out in July, and there's a question on whether these measures will be extended. So all those measures are making the United States markets very nervous. and that seems to account for what the downwards U.S. stock prices. Europe also is generally falling downwards last week, probably because it's following the U.S. markets. Asia also down today. Nikkei and the Chinese indices are down. Kospi, it's down today as well. It's been on a roller coaster ride since the end of last week, and Kosdaq has been on a downward trend since last Wednesday, and obviously today the news from the United States didn't help, so all these markets pretty much went down today.
Well, Professor, as we just heard a minute ago, Bloomberg's predicting negative growth in the world's major economies of almost 20% in the second quarter. Korea, though, expected to fare quite a bit better than that. What stands out to you in these numbers?
Okay, well, we need to take a look at what type of study the Bloomberg did. It actually examined research from 24 different investment banks and economic research institutions, and they're averaged out second quarter growth rate was minus 18.1%, but you have to remember that these are annualized rates. So the actual quarter-to-quarter rates are probably going to be about a quarter of that, 4.5%. It's a problem with statistics. Some countries prefer annualized rates. Other countries prefer just quarter-to-quarter rates. So it gets confusing sometimes. But in Korean terms, it's probably going to be about 4.5% worse than last second quarter of last year. Now, only China had a positive growth of 2.0%. Korea had the next best, but it was negative 1.8% annualized. So quarter to quarter, that's probably going to be about 0.45%. And the United States, again, annualized more than 30%, negative 30%. Japan, minus 22%. Germany, minus 11%. France, minus 19%, and so on. So it's going to be a really bad second quarter. Now, some optimism here. Europe is coming out of their shutdown, so perhaps their third quarter, while it still won't be very good, at least it'll be better than these numbers. But United States, as I just mentioned, there's a good possibility that they will get worse on the third quarter. And another problem is that virtually all academic economists, epidemiologists, and economic research institutions all believe that this slowdown will be fairly long. It'll last at least until late next year, maybe even the year before, even year after that. Just about the only people who were a bit optimistic that perhaps there will be a V-shaped quick recovery was Wall Street analysts, financial analysts, economists related to Wall Street institutions, but even they seem to be giving up hope.
Wow. Well, Professor, coming up this week, we'll have data on Korean businesses in May, also a business sentiment index for June. Briefly, we're almost out of time. What's coming up in the days ahead?
Okay, another interesting number that'll come up is the Korean Consumer Price Index. If the price index inflation is low, then we'll know that the problem is in demand rather than in supply. And then the U.S. unemployment data is also supposed to come out this week. Last month was a bit of a surprise. While there was a lot of additional unemployment, there was additional job hiring as well, which surprised a lot of people. We'll have to see whether it surprises us again this month or whether this month will be more pessimistic.
All right, we'll be looking out for those numbers. Thank you, Professor Young, for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, the Bank of Korea said today that the resurgence of COVID-19 infections in many countries means the pandemic is going to take longer than expected to subside, but it said its economic outlook as of June does not differ greatly from last month's. In May, the central bank had forecast a growth rate of minus 0.2% for South Korea this year. It mentioned today developing countries in particular like Brazil and India, which have seen big spikes in case numbers since starting to reopen. The number of people working for South Korean companies fell in May for the second consecutive month. According to the Labor Ministry, the number was down 311,000 on year, or 1.7%. This is a smaller decline compared to April, though, because government-related jobs were added in May. Jobs in hospitality, education, and retail continue to take a hit, but less so, thanks to schools reopening and the government relief payments made last month. The Lions Clubs International, a social welfare organization with some 1.4 million members worldwide, has chosen the president of Gachon University, Arirang, as the recipient of its Humanitarian Award. He was recognized for her exemplary humanitarian efforts, such as free medical services and the establishment of medical research institutes. Previous recipients include Mother Teresa and former U.S. President Jimmy Carter. He says she will use the grant of $250,000 to help children with heart-related diseases and to provide medical treatment for premature infants of migrant workers in South Korea. That brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.